Hey, we're here and we're back on the podcast with Mr. Kevin Scanlon, PhD, whose career spans roles as well in academic medicine, senior management in the pharmaceutical industry and biotech companies, and he's the author of The Hybrid Entrepreneur, which addresses key business issues faced by new ventures. So if you're someone who wants to learn from all of the past mistakes that have happened, find out about the successful characteristics of an inventor, entrepreneur, CEO, ask questions, and so much more, then Dr. Kevin is the man, the myth, the legend that you need to sit up and pay very close attention to. So, Mr. Kevin, glad to be speaking to you.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind introduction and the opportunity to talk to you.
Yeah, I'm here for you.
What would you like to know first?
Well, first I want to know, what has you super excited these days? You know, it's easy to say, like, here's what my life and career spans, but the last 3 to 6 months, what really gets you jazzed up?
Well, science has always jazzed me up, especially the new technologies that are coming out in terms of gene therapy, treating patients, but not only restricted to biology, but to AI and to cosmology. So I enjoy reading about all the different advances in the field of science.
Yes, it tickles the brain. You're reminding me, when I was a teenager, it was always fun to read through like Discover and Omni and magazines like that and say, man, this is something that it's just in the brand new in the testing phase, and it might not even impact me directly, but someday it'll impact me and I won't even realize. And you always hear about all this crazy cool stuff happening, say with CRISPR, or they're like talking about, you know, galaxies that are like unimaginable lengths away. But is there anything specific and random that just has really caught your attention as far as biology, cosmology, AI, anything that's just like, whoa, that blows my mind?
The YouTube has some phenomenal presentations of science. I mean, it's like being back in a university. The Webb telescope has been phenomenal. AI advances have been phenomenal. CRISPR is potentially very interesting, but it has a pharmacological limitation. So I'm very interested to see how they're going to overcome that. They can do what we call in vitro changes of the genome, but to do in vivo changes of the genome in patients, that's still a challenge.
Okay. So we need to get educated on YouTube and stay on top of just what's happening on a daily basis. And I find myself falling down a YouTube hole sometimes, Dr. Kevin, when they talk about, well, here's what's happening on Venus, or here's some of this like theoretical stuff that's happening. And so we need to be curious. We need to be learners. And as far as us learning from you and getting an idea a little bit about your personality, what would you say makes you unique? What makes you stand out?
Yeah. Well, as my mother always used to say, I look at things very differently than most people. So it's the observations that I see something that other people tend not to see.
Ooh. In what way?
Oh, looking at science. When I was starting my career in science, DNA research was the hottest topic in the academic field. And I decided to look at RNA. And there was hardly anybody looking at RNA. Now, everybody's looking at RNA, and DNA, the sequence of the human genome, turned out to be much more complex than anybody thought. And the process of DNA to RNA to protein to disease is even more complex than anybody thought. So people looked at DNA, I looked at RNA. We used technology to disrupt RNA to see if we could change the disease process. So that's an example.
Great. So you look at what maybe not everyone else is looking at, and mRNA in particular sort of saved the planet a few years ago, right? When we were figuring out this vaccine and keep preventing all these deaths, keeping people from getting sick. And so, as far
Yeah.
as what you've done in business, I know that you work with lots of companies and startups and investors, and you've done many amazing things in science. So, do you have any war stories, so to speak, to tell us about some of these companies you've been involved with?
Well, both my academic career and my business career. Um, Academic career was a bit harder. The diagnostic assay that they used to detect COVID virus, called RNA PCR. I had published the first paper in the field 30 years ago on it. It was rejected from 8 scientific journals as being impossible to do. How's that for a war story?
Is impossible back then, but then reality proved wrong. And so that kind of speaks to the power of perseverance, right? And saying, well, I get rejected. I'm not just going to give up. I'll figure out some way through or figure out another thing. And so, like, what do you think that you do right? That when you see these other successful inventors, entrepreneurs, CEOs do, like, what are the personality characteristics or beliefs or actions that you think the successful people have, which unsuccessful people don't?
Well, the good news about scientists are that they develop a field of research that they're very interested in, and they have to convince other scientists that that science is good. So that's perseverance. And so that quality to go into business is also very important. It's not easy being successful in science, and it's not easy being successful in business. It's a lot of hard work, it's a lot of frustration, especially if you're an entrepreneur and you want to change things. So, perseverance, but your personality has to help a lot. You've got to be able to get up, back up off the floor and keep going again, because you're going to get knocked down. What Nietzsche said, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger.
Yes. Well, great. So it seems like there's an element of, like you mentioned, perseverance, but there's probably some persuasion and storytelling and just communication, right? Because there's you doing the work, and then there's you writing about the work, but there's also you kind of like selling your idea and getting other people involved. And so, did that always come naturally, or was that a struggle? This idea of like getting other people on board with your work and your scientific ideas?
It can be a challenge at times. You try to be as objective as possible. You try to convince them with logic and science and business. Um, but sometimes you have to be more persuasive. So people are naturally resistant and don't want to change. So to get them to understand what you're trying to do has always been a challenge.
And is there one area in particular when that happened? Like you mentioned about being rejected with the RNA, but was there a point in your career when you said like, "Hey, I really have to step up my game as far as being convincing and in expressing what I have here"?
Um, it's just listening to the criticism of the people and then evaluating what you're doing. And is there some truth to what they're saying? And it turns out that most people that criticize your work as a scientist or as a business person do have some valid questions that have to be addressed. And so I think that's what's the most important, is that you're able to listen to the criticism and then reevaluate your position to see if they're right or you need to change.
I like that a lot. That if someone criticizes you, don't throw out everything they said. Like, what's the reason for that? If they jump to a conclusion, why is that? Maybe there's something you have to say. If they misunderstand something, well, then maybe correct them, or if they have some kind of objection, that's helpful. And so I know that you have this amazing book called The Hybrid Entrepreneur, A Novel Career in Science and Business. Because it's one thing to give like the hodgepodge of advice, but it's another to say, hey, here's this book and here's this process. Here's the evaluation criteria for team, product, business model, exit plan. Here's like a step-by-step process. So in this book, The Hybrid Entrepreneur, if someone wants to become an entrepreneur or be a better one, what will they discover in this book?
That's a very good question. 1 minute for PR. There's the book. I deliberately made it as short as possible, only about 120 pages. And the book is based on two hypotheses that I had. One, when I was in the investment community, the entrepreneurs did not understand the business people and the investors. And conversely, the investors couldn't understand the entrepreneurs and why they thought their product was so important. And it was a question of education and vocabulary. So when I taught the course on entrepreneurship, I realized that halfway into the course, the students were not understanding certain things that I was proposing in the process. And so I started listening to their questions very carefully. So over 6 years, over 600 students took the course, and we evaluated over 100 university companies. And each company was broken up into a team of 4 to 6 students. And each semester, the students in the class got to see 4 or 5 companies, different problems, different issues. And so what we did was we evaluated each company from the point of view of the entrepreneur, the customer, and the investor. And that's what this book is based on. And then at the end of the 14 weeks of the course of the semester, the CEO is given anywhere from a 40 to 100-page report on business plan, PowerPoint presentation to the investors, a customer survey of his product, and a term sheet. And then based on those questions that the students asked over the 14 weeks each semester, that was the basis of me refining the book to help the entrepreneur understand what he has to face when he sees investors, and for the investor to understand where the entrepreneur is coming from. So that was the basis of my contribution to help people understand the process.
That's wonderful. You crowdsourced it. And it's interesting to think about it from these three perspectives, right? There's the entrepreneurs, there's these investors, and there's also the customers, and they all have different perspectives, they all have different needs. And it's great that you looked into all these different companies to see the overlaps and to see the differences. And so with all of these semesters, these classes, these students, these projects, looking into these businesses, I'm sure there were a lot of surprises, ahas. I'm sure there was like many unexpected developments. So is there anything noteworthy that came about from this where you were proven completely wrong or you completely changed your thinking about something?
Probably the most shocking thing about the course was how the CEOs reacted to the final product the students did. And some CEOs actually hired some of the students to work in their
Wow.
company. Conversely, some of the CEOs could not believe that the students would know more about the company than the CEO. And so I had one or two toss the report into the rubbish bin. So that was one of the more shocking things. But in general, they were very appreciative. It was free, and it was a win-win for everybody. It was a win for the CEO. It was a win for the students. And the students got to see different companies and different problems. So what we tried to do is simply evaluate for the CEO, would their product go to the right customer, and would the customer buy that product, and would the investor get a return on investment? We kept it very simple.
And it showed the thin skinnedness of some of these CEOs, right? Like we just were talking a few minutes ago about how important it is to take criticism appropriately and kind of take it with those different degrees of absorption. And sometimes you say, hey, that's exactly what I need to hear. Well, maybe that's a little right, but off base. And when they just completely reject it, it's like they don't even want to change at all. And so, as far as you mentioned that there are perhaps some problems that these companies have. Is there any one that like appeared more than others?
Listening, listening. They we've as an investor and as in an investment group, we like to look at the dynamics of the CEO and if he brings senior members of the company with him. And we like to watch how they interact with each other. That was very important to us. The psychology of, do I want to put my money on this CEO? So the product is good. We had a rule in the investment community. We would rather invest in a second class product and a first class team than a second class team and a first class product. And the reason is because everything changes so dramatically from your concept to the final product. That evolution, you have to be able to pivot. And if you don't pivot to get the right product for the right customer, the company goes under.
That's a very interesting insight that you would rather have the second or the first rate team second rate product because the product probably will change and you might pivot, but if that team won't change or if they are just stuck in their ways or dysfunctional, then you're completely dead in the water and they won't do anything to improve their situation. And so you have all this cool stuff that you've done in academia, with science, with business. You have this book, The Hybrid Entrepreneur, but you and I are limited on time here, Mr. Kevin, right? We're only here on a podcast for this little blink of an eye to give people a taste, a tease of what they will get when they get The Hybrid Entrepreneur, very amazing book. But as far as drawing attention to what is just very interesting for you right now, is there a missing hidden question in our conversation that I should be asking you about business, science, entrepreneurship that I just don't know to ask you?
Well, you could ask me, how do you teach entrepreneurship, which is very difficult.
I imagine.
And the key is one example from the book. But the other thing that's most important, I think, is vocabulary, how to learn the vocabulary of the scientist or the technologist, and how to learn the vocabulary of the business person. Because what happens when a business person listens to a technologist, they use a vocabulary that the business person doesn't understand. And that raises their level of anxiety. Conversely, the scientist listens to the businessman and his anxiety goes up. And if you think that's bad, the lawyers then get involved with their vocabulary and everybody's anxiety goes up. So the question is, can you understand each group's position and understand how to communicate effectively? And I think that's probably one of the most important things from the book. Understanding the different players in the ecosystem so that they can at least approach each other. This was a problem when they cloned the human insulin gene in the 1980s. A professor from UCSF and an investment banker sat down in the morning at a little cafe and had a cup of coffee, and the two of them talked about cloning the insulin gene and making money out of it. Can you imagine what the conversation was like?
It sounds very complex.
How would a highly regarded academic professor communicate with a highly successful venture capital investment banker? They did it.
Hopefully with
And
lots
in
of
turn,
analogies or doodling on a napkin or something.
Yeah. And they created Genentech, which became one of the first major biotech companies. So it is possible, but it requires both team members to step up and give a little.
And do you have any suggestions on how to do that stepping up? Do you suggest that, say, the venture capitalists and the scientists are looking to work together and they're looking to understand each other? Do you recommend they learn each other's vocabulary, they learn each other's concepts? How do we communicate on the same page, so
Well,
to
it
speak?
helps. It helps.
Okay.
It it's gotten a lot better from 40 years ago, and it's gotten much better in the last 20 years. And the investors have become much more sophisticated, and the scientists have become much more sophisticated with business. So it has gotten better, but it still comes down to personalities and getting the right fit. It's like Hewlett Packard, Microsoft, Apple. These are people that were able to come together and be successful with different points of view. That's what
Yeah.
made the company successful. Now, conversely, we look at a lot of companies as investors. And why do companies fail? They fail because, one, they run out of money. The expenses become far more than they had expected, one. And two, the dynamic of the company. The people that found the company and grow it from a startup to finding the first product to selling the first product to growing the company may not match the skill sets necessary to grow that company. And so that's another failure. Culture dynamics within the company. So money and culture are the two biggest flaws in startup companies.
Money and culture. And that tells us that we need to be self-aware and we need to be curious and we need to be learners and learn some of these stories and figure out about these companies that have come before us who have made these mistakes. That way we don't make the same mistakes that they made, and we can ideally have a more informed path forward. And so if someone says, man, this guy, Dr. Kevin, he's seen some things, he has come to some very interesting
We have
insights and
another,
conclusions. Oh,
I have another story that I can give you in
wonderful.
terms
Let's
of
hear it.
what happens if the company doesn't go forward.
Yes.
What have you learned from that? So, successful companies we've studied and we've looked at them and we've asked, why have you been so successful? And the CEO has adjusted and adapted and he had the right culture with the company. You would think that if he started a second company, he would be as successful. And unfortunately, the failure rate is about 80%. So
Huh.
the question you have to ask yourself is, how did that happen? If he was so successful with the first company, why wasn't he successful with the second company? And it comes down to a simple concept. He was very fortunate, asked the right questions, and did the right thing in the first company. And that skill set that he learned, he applied to the second company. Unfortunately, the second company didn't have the same problems. So he had
Ooh.
a completely different set of problems. And what worked in the first company didn't work in the second company. And that's why it failed.
Huh. So there's no guarantee, right? You think you have it figured out, but then new company, you have a new set of problems. And that's why we need your help here, Dr. Kevin. People need to read your book, The Hybrid Entrepreneur. That way they have the right team surrounding them. That way they have the right approach, the right strategy. And so if people are excited and enthused by this conversation that we've had and they want to find out more about you, what are some next steps?
Well, they can contact me or they can read the book. The book is very helpful. So you have to do it on your own, but if you have a question, I'm available. I've always been a teacher.
Well, great. So we definitely need to check out that book so that way we can figure out what we don't know, and jump into the management expertise, organizational skills, and vocabulary necessary to be a successful entrepreneur based on Dr. Kevin Scanlon's academic and business career. You jump in, you learn some of these amazing stories, you'll have a lot of fun. And as people are checking out The Hybrid Entrepreneur by Kevin J. Scanlon on Amazon here, Dr. Kevin, it's time for the ending scary part of the show where I try to stump you, I try to put you on the spot by asking you for a fun or interesting quote or lesson that has served you in life or in business. So, what comes to mind for a quote or lesson?
One of my favorite ones is everyone's in the lifeboat and everyone has to be rowing in the same direction if you want to get to land or if you want a successful company. If you're not all rowing in the same direction, it's going to be a failure.
Yes. So let's get to rowing in the same direction. And the first step is to get some guidance, which you get in the form of this book, The Hybrid Entrepreneur, where you can jump into these case studies that Kevin mentioned about if consumers want or need your product, how to create the story that will fit the right investor for funding, understanding the investor evaluation and screening process. We mentioned how there's this disconnect between entrepreneurs and investors. So it helps us to figure out these different wants and needs and vocabularies. That way we can speak their language. That way we can break through of all the noise. That way you can ask the right questions to build a strong ecosystem with service providers, customers, and investors. If you want to be an entrepreneur, read this book, The Hybrid Entrepreneur by Dr. Kevin J. Scanlon. It is about his personal experiences as a scientist and inventor, entrepreneur, CEO, and investor. And Dr. Kevin, it's been a blast speaking to you about this and getting the ideas flowing. People need to check out The Hybrid Entrepreneur, and I really appreciate you stopping by, taking the time.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you.